yesterday, actually, I read your draft of your speech and found that it was so creative, brilliant, and very smart,
Thank
as
you.
I expected.
Thank you.
So everybody agrees with me? So I heard that you are coming to Korea very often these days, and then I briefly heard about your new business. And can you talk about what you are doing recently to our audience?
Yes, actually, I started my own company, so I shifted from being a member of government to being an entrepreneur. I'm very proud about it because it was not a very easy move to decide and to achieve. So I created a company, and it's funny because it has an echo with my personal history, because my company will have two different activities. First activity will be to advise and counsel French or Korean companies if they want to develop their business in the other country. Mm-hmm. So cross-border advice and advisory activities. And then the second will be an investment fund, a venture capital fund that I could create because I had great investment of Naver and Line companies. You are familiar with these companies. And they will invest in Europe in startups. So that will be my activity in the coming years.
Wow, that's great. And actually, you were working in the government section, the public section. How come you decide to do the business in the private sector? I think it was very, very hard to convert from the public service to the private business.
It was not so hard, actually, because I was trained. I did a business school, so I was trained in business majors. So it was not totally absent from my training and from my personal culture. Mm-hmm. And I was also very proud to be a high civil servant and to work as a member of government. So it's not a denial of what I did before. But I felt that at that point of my life, I felt like creating something, doing something new. And I like to have a wide range of different experiences. And I said to myself, it's the right moment to do it, because if I wait for like 5 years or 10 years, I won't have the courage to do it. I won't dare to do it again. So I thought it was the perfect point in my life where I could have a new sort of adventure and do it. And I took my decision very quickly, actually, and I'm very proud about it.
Wow, that's so good to hear that. And actually, working at the government, kind of public sector, and working in the private sector, do you experience or found any difference working as a mother and kind of trying to keeping the balance between work and life? Is there any great kind of distinction or difference in the public and private in France?
I'm talking about my experience. I think the experience as a minister, and you're probably totally aware of that, is very different from public experience as high civil servant experience. What I felt when I was a minister, and I'm sure you understand what I mean, was that I had lost totally my freedom in organizing my everyday life, in my agenda. So I had meetings all the time, all my weekends were occupied with official activities, etc. So I had absolutely no leverage on my agenda, even as a mother or as a wife. And what I find now that I have recovered my freedom, I still work an awful lot. I work all the time. But I can work at home. I can decide that I stop for a moment and take care of my daughter and then go back to work. I really can decide how I organize myself. And this freedom is really, for me, very important. And it's a great difference between now and before, when I was a member of government.
I see. And then when you are raising kids, your daughter, and then when you have to work in the government and in your own company, I'd like to kind of hear about what your husband, how greatly he helped you during your kind of entire career.
Yeah, I think it's very important to be very supportive in a couple when you have positions such as the position I had. Actually, we had a very tough time at one point because when I was a minister, my husband was also chief of staff of another minister. And so we were two in the household who have very, very demanding positions. And for the children, it must have been 1 or 2 years that were a bit difficult. But then our children developed a great sense of autonomy, and they grew, very autonomous. And now it's very nice also for them because they know how to cope when they are on their own. But I think it was very important to make all the decisions with my husband, always as a couple, because I took decisions, for instance, to enter the government that had a great impact on our family life. And if my husband had not been supportive, or if he had felt like a sort of competition, or if he had been a bit jealous because I was exposed in the media, that sort of things, I think we would have had great difficulties. But my husband is very feminist, and I think he was always, he was very, very supportive, and I felt that I could find comfort and support at home, and I think it was really key, and I would not have managed my career as I did for the past 10 years if my husband had not been here to support me. So very key issue.
Actually, I think the iDaily should invite Fleur's husband.
Yeah, that's true.
To have a lecture on the to the
that's right.
To the men who are the husband or the boss or the staff of the working woman in this in such a kind of session. And actually, I found that you were working as a minister covering the small, medium-sized corporate and the digital and tourism, and then later Minister of Culture. And then I think, and then before that you were working as a media representative for the presidential candidate. Then I didn't know that you were working as a media representative during the campaign. I found that I was a spokesperson during the presidential campaign. Then I worked as a minister of gender equality and the minister of culture. Then I found that your work experience and my work experience are very much in common. And then I'm now kind of studying how to enhance our tourism industry and how to enhance our culture people or the kind of a creative contents industry. And then when you are very often coming to Korea and see a lot of things about Korea and see a great potential in Korean industry and Korean culture industry, then what do you think about the Korean tourism should do? In terms of, and then can you tell us what is the attraction? What is the most attractive things that Korea has to the Western and European people?
Oh, it's very difficult to answer in a short period of time, but I think the great asset right now is that this Hallyu and K-pop, K-drama culture, Korean food also. Is now very well perceived in France and in Europe in general. So there is a great interest, which probably did not exist maybe 10 years ago, in Korean culture in general, and Korean art of living, etc. So I think you should take advantage of this growing passion in order to attract new kinds of tourists. And I think people can be interested in visiting temples because there's also great interest in France or in Europe in Buddhism or in temple stay, that sort of things. I think people would be fascinated also about Seoul because Seoul is the epitome of a 21st century capital and is associated with values of creative industries, technologies, energy, sort of very dynamic feeling that you can feel that when you're in Seoul. So I would definitely focus on all the aspects of the Korean culture that are now perceived as fascinating for a European audience, and also maybe what can be intriguing for foreign tourists. But I'm willing, because it's so difficult to answer in a short period of time. I was briefly in charge of tourism also in my portfolio for foreign trade and tourism, but I'm willing to exchange and have discussions with you in the future. It would be my honor and my pleasure to do that, to exchange views, because I think it's a very, very interesting issue, and it can also be a very interesting economic activity. It's, in France, it's 7% of GDP is tourism, so it's an important economic sector.
Right. And then when you come to Korea, I think you have met a lot of business people. And then have you met many women business people here too?
Not so many, I must say. Not so many, I must say. So, yeah, quite. I would say maybe like 5% of, maybe less than 10% of the people I meet in high-ranking positions are women. So, but you know, in France it's about the same. When I used to be a minister for small and medium businesses and innovation, the people I met usually founders, startup founders, people in top management of big corporations. They usually were men. So that's what I was mentioning in my keynote speech. I think there's a lot of progress to achieve in top executive positions to make them more feminine, more female.
I heard that France adopted a law that requests the corporate to have an equal number of female management from January 1st next year. Do you think that all the companies can abide by the law properly? Yeah,
actually it's on boards, not in management. That would be great if it was also in management, but it's on boards. And yeah, they will abide because they have had, you know, the bill was passed in 2009, so they have had time to get ready. And if they do not abide by the law, in the bill there's a clause that says that all the companies who do not abide by the law, they won't be able to pay board bonuses to board members. So all the board members won't be able to earn their wages. So that's a very, very good incentive to abide by the law. So I'm sure that all the big companies will abide. And it's a very interesting move because otherwise, I can tell you, I had discussions with headhunters, people who appoint people in the boards. And before the law was passed, they were always saying, we are looking for women, but we can't find them. There are no women ready for boards. And it was always a good excuse to say we can't find any good woman to put in the boards. And now that the law has been passed, well, they have found the women, so they were somewhere, and they did exist. So now you can see that if you let people free to decide, change doesn't come. If you force them, then it happens. But
I see. How many years, how long was the transition that since the law was passed and until it starts execution?
8 years. 8 years.
8 years.
Yeah, so that's a long time.
I see. That's quite a kind of long period of time to give enough time to the corporate to find the right person to sit in the board.
Yeah, exactly. But so they could not say we didn't have time to get ready. So we could see over the past 8 years change because they were all starting to recruit women and appoint women in boards. And now, today, in these 40 biggest corporations, and then in 2018, this bill will be extended to all companies above 500 people. So it will be almost a wide majority of companies will have to abide by this bill. You could see really the change, and the pace of change was very rapid because people were obliged to abide by the law. So it was very, very efficient, very efficient.
Actually, when I was in the National Assembly and when I was working as the Minister of Gender Equality and Family, I was in the middle of a very strong discussion whether we have to take the affirmative action, imposing quota, or whether we have to work very diligently without such a kind of imposing law. And then many people talk about the negative impact about imposing those quotas by law. However, kind of upon hearing what Flair just said to us, having kind of long enough period of time to prepare to help those companies or to help any institution to be prepared to meet the law for 8 years, 9 years, 10 years, and then that is kind of enough time to recruit the proper and capable women to work in that position. I think I learned a very great idea from you, and I think many women sitting in this audience working for the government, government policies, I think this is a kind of a very brilliant idea that we have to think about kind of adopting one. I think, thank you, Flair. It is
I will pass you all
really
the documentation if you want to.
I found that 민무숙 원장님 is there, and then I found that the current Minister of Gender Equality and Family will be giving you a lecture this afternoon, and I think this is a very, very good idea. And then I strongly recommend you to listen further from Flair. Let's talk about the power. Actually, when I was asked by the media people during the interview, kind of a question that, do you like power? Do you want to get power? So actually several years ago, I really thought very carefully and seriously whether I like to have power or not. But I concluded that I don't like power, that power means, in a sense, that the people don't like the idea that I suggest, but they follow me because they fear about the power. So instead, I thought that what I really like to have is not power, but influence, that I can make the other people follow me voluntarily, and then deeply, based on the deep understanding that what I was trying to say to them, that I'd like to persuade the people with that is kind of an influence that I like. And then you briefly talked about power and then your ambition, being ambitious as a woman. And then can you briefly talk about what kind of power do you like and your know-how, how to execute your power when you are in your position?
I think I feel a bit the same as what you just described, and that's why I was mentioning in my speech that I don't like power for the sake of power, for power's sake in itself, but I like power if it means that I can have a real impact on society, on my country, and then I want to convince other people that because this impact will be positive, they need to follow me. Mm-hmm. So it's rather leadership than power, strictly speaking. So I think that's very feminine. I mean, I'm not a sociologist, but I think that women usually have this kind of, that's what I was calling ambivalence relationship to ambition and to power, because they don't assume to exercise power just for the sake of power. They want to prove that they will have a positive impact on society. And I think that's a great difference of a female relation to power, as opposed to a male, where I think probably power is very exciting in itself, because you know that you can impose your decisions and nobody is allowed to discuss. So I think I have a much more, similar approach to power. And I was asked, many journalists asked me, are you missing power, having power? Are you missing having a lot of people taking care of everything around you, etc.? And actually, I was never, very impressed by the attributes or the accessories of power. So I don't miss having a chauffeured car, having an assistant. I didn't really care about that. So I don't miss that much, all these accessories. Mm-hmm. It was not what was interesting me in having power.
Mm-hmm. I see. Actually, I found something in common with you and me, and I think that can be the common features of all the women, I think. When I kind of resigned from my the public servant work, and then I returned as a natural person, and then I was like jobless for more than 1 year. And then at that time, I found that I felt very free, and that I was not concerned about the fact that I don't have my business card, and that I don't have my office, and I don't have my chauffeur, or I don't have a car waiting for me. I felt that was not very shameful or a little inconvenient, but that was totally okay. But I found many men who are used to work in an organization and the work as a high-ranking officer, management, And then oftentimes when they retire, I found that many of them feel very uncomfortable not having a business card within office to commute every day. So I think in that sense, women has a little kind of competitiveness and kind of a stronger points or power that very flexible. So even though we are not in a certain seat or we are not in a certain power, we can adjust ourselves very, very easily and kind of make our life very flexible. And I think the Flair, you felt the same way.
Yeah, exactly. And also maybe because what probably we are also have in common is that we are not totally obsessed with just one thing in life, having power, being a minister, etc. I could imagine myself doing a lot of different things, and I feel, yesterday I was in my home and I was doing some painting because I like to paint, and I was painting for like hours, and I was feeling very happy. So I have a wide range of different points of interest, and if you have a wide range of points of interest, then you don't feel overly frustrated because you're not a minister anymore, or you're not this or that anymore. You can find interest and in many things in life. So if you're not totally focused 100% on just one thing, having power, being a member of government, being a minister, then you can live very easily through changes, and you're a member of government, and then you're not a member of government anymore. It doesn't matter that much. The important thing is to find interest in what you do at a certain point of your life. And I think if you have that inside you, it helps you being very resilient and accept switches, changes in your life very easily.
Actually, during your speech, kind of talking about the type of leadership of women and men, and the men are, if the strong leader is conceived, the man's strong leader is conceived as commanding and controlling, while the strong women is considered some hysteric or bossy. But I actually laughed to read your sentences that you start your day as a collaborative person, and then you found at the end of the day, you found yourself as bossy. And then I think how to execute leadership properly is a kind of a great know-how. Actually, I met a friend who had an advice from one of his friends that his friend told to my friend that if I name him like Jack, you don't have enough charisma. You have to practice how to get angry and how to show yourself efficiently that you are angry, and how to make other people listen to you carefully. And then he actually practiced how to get angry in front of people. And then when you exercise your power and your leadership, have you ever think about how to efficiently execute my power, or how to efficiently deal with people, develop your people skill to execute your leadership when you are in a higher position?
Actually, I didn't practice that. I realized now with, afterwards, when I look back on my experience, that probably one of my weaknesses was precisely that I never got angry. I didn't know how to, even when people did something a bit wrong, I didn't like to tell them it was wrong and you did a bad job, etc. It's something, probably it's a skill that I miss. I don't know how to yell at people and to tell them your job was not good. So what I did usually was that I was very collaborative, and my door was always open and people could come in. I was not an authoritarian type, and people needed an appointment with me, etc. It was with my team. It was very collaborative and a flat organization. And actually, what I noticed was that people, I let people to respect what I was saying without having to be authoritarian or really bossy, etc. And they really came to me very naturally to have a decision. And I noticed that usually they didn't challenge my decision, or they did it with very rational, very objective arguments. And usually in the course of discussions, I came to change my mind sometimes. So they saw that I was not a very stubborn type, and I could also change my mind if the arguments were rational or objective. So I think it was really, I tried to have leadership in the sense of a very rational leadership based on, very non-affective criteria, but very objective, rational criteria. And I think it worked quite well. And also the atmosphere in my staff was good. So for me, it's very important to work in a good working environment with people who don't have problems of ego and who are not competing to be friends with me, that sort of thing. So I like to have a very, very cool and efficient working relationship with the people of my staff.
I see. When I work with the other people in an institute, especially when I see a boss, and then when I see a boss has a great leadership or not, one of my criteria is whether he or she makes decision as an informed decision based on the sufficient information, and then whether he or she executes his or her decision very strictly, and whether there is any consistency. And then do you kind of have any kind of advice to the women in the kind of leadership position, how to earn the great respect, or how to earn the better or stronger leadership in the institute when we are during the working process?
I think there may be different kinds of leadership. I think my leadership was rather the one you mentioned, so I was really trying to have a great knowledge of all the issues before I took a decision. So I really wanted to take decisions only based on very rational criteria and a very good understanding of the issue that was at stake. But then you can have also, I'm sure, other forms of leadership, like based on intuition. And I'm sure that, I've met people who probably did not know all the aspects of a problem, but then they could take a good decision based on their intuition, or like a sort of sixth sense. Or, I'm not saying there's only one kind of leadership, and all leaders should have the same recipe. So my advice would be, try to identify what makes your strength and what you're good at, and exercise your leadership according to what you feel deeply. I think it's difficult to put yourself in the shoes of another person, because at the end of the day you cannot play a role the whole time. So I would, it's very difficult, I think, to identify what can make you a good leader or what doesn't, and to work on your strengths and to try to eliminate your weaknesses. But I would say, you should rely on what you feel makes you a good leader and try to emphasize these qualities.
I see. Actually, I think that in France, you have more social infrastructure to help the working women raising kids. I think that the level of that assistance, the social assistance, is a little higher than Korea. And actually in Korea, as a cultural the background, in Korea, all those household management and the raising kids responsibilities are imposed on women. And then, can you show one slide that mom and dad? Anybody the PowerPoint? The next one. The next one, the mom and dad one. Right. So that is, to mom, everybody asks questions. Mom, I'm cold. Mom, I can't find my notebook. Is dinner ready yet? Where is my shirt? And I'm hungry, everything. To dad, where is mom? So that is the end of the question, and everybody rely on mom. That is the kind of the social atmosphere and environment of Korea facing, all the working women are facing. And then as you just mentioned, the college entrance, the rate and the employment rate in their 20s, I think that the women's employment rate is a little higher than men in their 20s. But as soon as they get into their 30s, when they get married and having children, and then the employment rate, the gap between men and women is more than 35%, if I remember correctly. So that means it's very, very hard for the working women raising kids to continue their career when they raise kids, especially when they're young, and helping the kids to go to school and etc. And to those young women kind of struggling between work and life, do you have any kind of advice for them to how to overcome and how to endure and then keep their career until the end of their career?
Well, it's very difficult. First, I think they should choose a husband that is a feminist. They should pass a test before they get married. But this joke apart, I think it's very difficult for women because aside from what we call that the second working day of women in France. The second working day is when you get home and you have to prepare for dinner and the bath, etc. That's the second working day. But what is very difficult, I felt, as a working woman, a working mother, was not to feel guilty all the time. Because aside from this practical and logistics issue where you have to take care of the doctor, of the school, etc., you feel guilty when you're not at home for dinner, when you're not at home to make the homework with the kids. So I would say that the most difficult part, don't feel overly guilty, because if you have children, they would like also to have an active mother because it gives them a role model that is, I think, very important in the way they structure their own psychology and the way they look at life in general. And I think especially if you raise young daughters, it's important for them to have the model of a woman that is autonomous, financially autonomous, that has her career, etc. And try to focus on the time that you spend with your children to have a very quality time, because the kids are not, they're not angry with you at the end. I was afraid that my daughter might be angry with me when she grew older, and that she would tell me, well, where were you when I was a child? You were never at home. But she doesn't actually. We have a great relationship, and she has perfectly understood that I was doing things that were important to me, but also maybe to the country, etc. And she's not mad at all about that. So I would say to women, you should not feel too guilty. I'm not saying you should not feel guilty at all, because I think it's not possible. You should not feel too guilty. And I had always something in mind when I was a minister. I like this French very famous children psychiatrist who is called Marcel Ruffo. And he said, a good parent, what should be his mark? His mark should be 11 on 20. His mark should not be 20 on 20, his score. His score should not be 20 on 20. His score would be 11 on 20. So I think it was good because it made me feel less guilty not to be a perfect mother and to have 20 on 20, but only 11 on 20. So I think we should definitely try to get rid of socially imposed guilt. That's my advice.
I see. When I raised two kids when they were very young, in my 30s, one day I found that I worked too long hours, and then I was working at a very, very demanding law firm. And then one day I kind of thought very seriously about quitting the job and converting my career as a part-time job. And then days later, a question came up with me that if I quit my job, I studied very hard to pass the bar exam and studied very hard and worked very hard at the law firm. But if I quit my job to raise my daughters, and then my daughters, they will study very hard and kind of work in a very nice place and work hard to get that job, and then they have to quit their job because they have to raise their children. And then what is the whole point of educating women? So I faced a very fundamental question. And then I didn't know how to solve a problem, but I just then decided, let's keep my career until I find the right answer. But years later, these days, I really thought that wow, at that time, it was very, very smart decision that I did not quit my career or convert my career because of I have to raise my kids. And then I think that will apply to every working women, especially in this audience, that if you have any difficulties in raising kids and keeping balance between work and life, I think there is no still equilibrium between work and life, but we have to act as a swinging pendulum between work and family, and that only that kind of swinging pendulum can lead us to the very happy equilibrium or happy balance between work and life. And then actually, I see a lot of women leaders and women staffs in the company working at a very important positions. So we can say that the spring has come. But I always say that the spring has come only to the bottom of the mountain. But on the top of the mountain top is still covered with iceberg. And the iceberg is only be able to be melted only with the body temperature of women who are sitting on the iceberg. So I hope that every woman in this audience will do our best and do our best to keep the balance between work and life. And then I really appreciate the personal advice and personal experience of Fred that who shows a great kind of as a role model, as a working mother, and role model as a kind of public servant who converted successfully to the private sector and who bravely opened her own startup. And then I think in every sense that Fred is kind of somebody that is working as a great role model to the many young women in Korea. And 여러분, 우리 플레르한테 큰 박수 한번 부탁드리겠습니다.
Thank you. Thank you.